I've often found myself sitting in the quiet moments, the kind filled with nothing but the soft hum of daily life around me, and wondering how I ended up feeling so utterly lost with money. Not broke, necessarily, not drowning in debt or living paycheck to paycheck, but just adrift. Like I'm on a river without any clear bank in sight, no landmarks or signposts, only currents pushing me who knows where. I don't know exactly where I am financially, and even less so where I'm headed. It's a strange kind of confusion, one that isn't loud or frantic, but quietly unsettling, like a fog creeping in, blurring the edges of my confidence and sense of control. There's this subtle weight in every financial choice I make. I'll catch myself hesitating over something simple, like deciding whether to spend a bit more on a quality item or hunt for a sale. The question isn't about affordability so much as the fear of going down the wrong path. Is this the right decision? Will it mess up what I should really be doing? It's exhausting, this silence inside my head screaming, what if you're messing this all up? And the crazy part is, I'm not paralyzed because I can't manage money. I'm stuck because I don't have a clear map, no vision of where exactly I want to go or how to get there. It's like I'm trapped in this loop. The less clear my financial direction, the more I doubt myself. That doubt makes every choice heavier, every opportunity riskier. And the harder it gets, the more I want to freeze rather than move. That hesitation only deepens the guilt. The kind that whispers, you should be further ahead, or why can't you just get this right? But it's not about capability. It's about not knowing where to start, not having that light on the path. Without it, I stumble over my own shadow, beat myself up for failing to see the way forward. This confusion doesn't stay contained just in my wallet or bank statements. It spills over. I feel it in my work, where every day can seem like scrambling without a clear goal. It creeps into how I talk about money with others, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes withholding because I'm unsure what I really want or how to express it. And often, it curls around my self-esteem itself, whispering doubts about my worth tied to financial success. I know I'm capable. I know I have skills and dreams. But that persistent inner fog dulls my confidence and blurs my sense of possibility. Sometimes I catch myself imagining what it would be like to simply know where I'm going. To have a clear vision, something solid to grasp onto when the noises outside get loud or when unexpected challenges show up. What if I could wake up without that silent worry gnawing at me, that almost invisible pressure pressing on my chest? What if decisions didn't feel like threats, but as steps forward I wanted to take? That longing isn't just about money. It's about freedom from confusion. It's about the relief that comes with clarity, the calm that follows when the brain stops spinning and the heart feels steadier. I feel like I've been waiting for that moment, hoping it might come naturally with time or some big change. But honestly, it hasn't. The more I ignore the fog, the thicker it seems to grow. And the more it grows, the more I realize that this isn't just about numbers or budgets. It's about something deeper. They say clarity is power, but what if I'm powerless because I don't have clarity? If this sounds familiar to you, you're not alone. Maybe you felt that silent doubt creep up every time you think about your finances. Maybe you've caught your breath tightening when you try to make a big decision or felt that subtle sinking feeling at the end of every month as you glance at your bank balance. It's not just about the money. It's about how that lack of clear direction quietly gnaws away at your confidence, your peace of mind, your sense of security in the world. We're going to explore this feeling together, the place where financial confusion becomes a barrier, not because of outside circumstances, but because the path simply isn't visible. This isn't a story about being broken or failing. It's about being temporarily lost. It's about the hidden shadow that blurs what's possible until we can clear it away. If you've told yourself you're just not ready yet, or that someone else's approach won't work for you, that's okay. This is a very different journey. One that starts with seeing that fog for what it really is and gently stepping toward the clarity waiting on the other side. As we move forward, I invite you to sit with that feeling of being lost, not to be overwhelmed by it, but to understand its quiet power over us. Imagine for a moment what it could mean to wake up one day with a sense of direction that feels right, not forced. Imagine how it might change the way you show up in your job, your relationships, your dreams. That possibility isn't far off. It's actually closer than we might think. And it begins with acknowledging where we really are, not where we wish we could be. Let's take this step together. I remember a particular evening not long ago when I sat at my kitchen table, bills spread out before me like a puzzle missing key pieces. Not one number alone overwhelmed me. It was the haze of uncertainty swirling in my mind that made the silence deafening. Amid the clutter of figures, I realized I was less afraid of the actual amounts and more unsettled by the absence of direction, no strategy, no compass guiding my steps. This wasn't a sudden realization, but a creeping truth, like noticing the slow dimming of a light bulb. I suddenly felt like a mariner lost at sea, steering without stars, grappling with waves of anxiety that rose inconspicuously but relentlessly. What struck me deeply that night was how financial choices had transformed into emotional battlegrounds. Each decision seemed to echo louder because I lacked a narrative, an overarching storyline I could lean on when doubts crowded in. I recognized then that clarity doesn't merely illuminate where my money should go. It untangles the knots of hesitation that strangle action before it even takes shape. In absence of that clarity, my mind turned into a maze more than a tool. It tangled possibilities, blurred priorities, and trapped me in indecision. When options collide without order, even the simplest steps feel like towering hurdles. This feeling reminded me of a time when I tried assembling a complex piece of furniture without instructions. I had all the components laid out, yet without guidance, I struggled to piece together what belonged where, wasting hours rearranging parts, growing frustrated. It dawned on me that managing finances without a clear vision operates the same way. Abundant resources, but scattered efforts squander potential. The chaos isn't due to scarcity or inability. It stems from a missing blueprint, a fog over the destination and route. Reflecting further, I realized this mental fog also plants seeds that nurture fear beneath the surface. When I considered making investments or adjusting budgets, I felt as if I stood at the edge of a precarious cliff, unsure whether to leap or retreat. The absence of a clear target meant each choice seemed weighted by shadows of what if. I've noticed that uncertainty breeds hesitation, and hesitation slowly erodes my sense of ownership over my financial life. It's not that the numbers themselves are terrifying. It's the unknown that they represent, the cavernous emptiness at the center of my plans. One evening, I tried to articulate this to a friend over coffee. It's like I'm playing chess in the dark, I told him. I can see the pieces near me, but not the whole board. I know there's a strategy, but I'm fumbling blindly. He nodded thoughtfully and posed a question that stayed with me. What if the first move isn't about winning or losing, but simply about turning on a light? That metaphor unlocked something inside me. It wasn't about having everything mapped out in perfect detail. Rather, it meant finding that initial spark of visibility, one manageable step that could transform the shadows into shapes I recognized. This shift from paralysis to action, even small and imperfect, reshaped how I saw my relationship with money. At work, for example, I started using this mindset to navigate my workload. Instead of being overwhelmed by an endless to-do list, I focused on clarifying short-term goals so I could confidently tackle one task at a time. Interestingly, this approach translated into my finances. Recognizing what I truly valued, security, freedom, peace, helped me prioritize where to allocate resources. The fog didn't vanish immediately, but the presence of clearer intentions began dissolving some of the anxiety that had felt so permanent. During this process, I also noticed how my internal dialogue changed. Previously, my self-talk was riddled with what-ifs and self-recriminations. Now, I caught myself softly saying things like, "I'm starting here," or "It's okay not to have all the answers right now." These phrases may sound small, yet they served as gentle anchors in a swirling sea of indecision. The strain of financial mystery lost some of its grip, replaced by cautious optimism taking root. Nonetheless, I remain acutely aware how delicate this shift is. At moments, the fog drifts back, whispering doubts and rekindling old insecurities. But I've learned to treat these intrusions as signals rather than verdicts. When confusion blooms again, it's a cue to pause and reconnect with the basics of where I want to go, reminding myself that clarity isn't an all-or-nothing state, but a continuum I can walk along. It has become clear that embracing this gradual process prevents me from succumbing to despair or impulsive reactions fueled by fear. Now, Consider how this applies when you face financial crossroads, or when a seemingly minor decision weighs heavily. Are you operating with a night vision that blurs details, or is there a source of light revealing steps forward? A path illuminated with clarity doesn't guarantee the absence of challenges, but it carves out space for thoughtful choices, less swayed by shadows of uncertainty. Clarity acts not just as a navigational tool, but as a shield that softens the impact of unknowns, allowing me to engage with finances from a place of agency instead of apprehension. It's intriguing to observe how a clear financial framework radiates beyond managing dollars and cents. It begins to influence how I relate to my ambitions and how I carry myself in conversations about money. I feel more willing to articulate my needs and boundaries because they rest on a foundation I can sense beneath the surface. This clarity frees me from the trap of indecision rooted in ambiguity, granting permission to shape my financial narrative actively, rather than reacting endlessly to external forces. As I continue this journey, I recognize that regaining footing does not require grand epiphanies. Instead, it involves cultivating moments of lucidity within the fog, visual landmarks that anchor my will and open pathways forward. Each moment of illumination chips away at the unknown, revealing a road that, while it may twist or rise and fall, is no longer invisible. And with that emerging path comes a quiet reassurance, the kind that whispers, "Here is where I begin again." There was a morning not long ago when I found myself staring at my reflection in the mirror, searching for a version of myself who had it all figured out. Someone confident, purposeful, with a firm grip on where each dollar should flow. Instead, looking back was a person tangled in a web of unanswered questions, whose internal compass spun wildly. It struck me then that losing direction isn't merely a mental state. It infiltrates our very sense of self and colors how we perceive our worth. The gnawing uncertainty begins to infiltrate not only how I view my finances, but who I believe I am in the world. It's as if my identity drifts alongside my financial indistinctness, leaving me stranded between who I am now and who I hope to become. On one particular afternoon, I shared this sensation with a colleague during a lunch break. He listened quietly, then said, "Sometimes, losing our bearings financially is like inheriting a map that's missing half the landmarks. We carry it, hoping to find the way, but the missing parts create a silent barrier." His metaphor stuck with me. It wasn't a simple lack of knowledge, but a disconnect between where I was and the invisible checkpoints that would normally guide me forward. In that moment, I realized that regaining my footing would demand more than tallying accounts or setting budgets. I would need to redefine the markers by which I measure progress, replenishing points of reference in my personal financial landscape. This insight nudged me toward transforming how I interacted with uncertainty itself. Instead of resisting confusion or treating it as a sign of failure, I began observing it curiously, as a message signaling which elements in my financial narrative were unclear and required deliberate attention. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down moments when I noticed decision-making became tangled or when frustration surfaced. These entries served as signposts to deeper patterns and beliefs I hadn't consciously recognized before. For instance, I noticed recurring instances where I hesitated to allocate funds for professional development, even though I believed growth was essential. Uncovering this contradiction led me to question underlying assumptions about deserving investment and risk. One vivid memory stands out. I sat under the kitchen light, my pen hesitating over the blank page before confessing, "Why do I freeze at the idea of spending on myself?" Writing this felt vulnerable, yet illuminating. Through this process, I understood that my self-imposed restrictions weren't merely financial caution. They stemmed from an internalized narrative warning me against stepping out of a narrowly defined safe zone. This awareness became a turning point because it shifted blame away from external circumstances and placed it where it belonged, inside the story I was telling myself. As these revelations surfaced, I began experimenting with shifting perspectives. For example, I challenged the habitual mindset that every expense needed to be scrutinized with skepticism, a mental posture that had, unintentionally, boxed me into scarcity thinking. By allowing myself to view select investments as seeds rather than risks, I opened new pathways for confidence to bloom. One time, I signed up for a course that promised not immediate returns, but long-term enrichment. My initial jitters, fueled by years of guarding resources, gradually softened. When weeks later, I found myself applying learned ideas at work and receiving positive feedback, a subtle but potent transformation unfolded. I felt empowered not simply by the skills gained, but by proving to myself I could pivot and grow beyond embedded fears. Yet, this journey also highlighted a paradox. Progress often arrived accompanied by new waves of vulnerability. Each time I ventured farther from familiar territory, old doubts reared up like phantoms. What if this confidence crumbles? Am I imagining progress? These questions threatened to sabotage the fragile momentum. However, instead of fleeing or silencing these fears, I welcomed them as part of the terrain. I started conversations within myself, reframing vulnerability as an indicator of stepping into meaningful change rather than evidence of weakness. This internal dialogue reimagined fears not as barriers, but as companions offering insights into where I still needed to nurture resilience. To illustrate, I recall a night when, after a long day, exhaustion mingled with apprehension. I sat quietly and said aloud, "It's okay to be scared. I'm learning." Speaking the words felt like breathing fresh air into a suffocating space. That simple acknowledgement cut through the paralysis that often follows uncertainty, renewing a commitment to proceed with kindness toward myself. Recognizing that confidence grows through persistent practice rather than perfection allowed me to re-engage with decisions that once seemed daunting. Now, reflect on your own experience when pathways feel shrouded. How do you respond when clarity evades grasp? Do you resist the discomfort, or can you lean into it with curiosity? Transforming uncertainty into an ally rather than an enemy dramatically alters how we inhabit financial challenges. Embracing the messiness of real progress, all the twists, stumbles, and revelations, invites a steadier forward motion. Through these moments, I learned that financial navigation is not solely about achieving flawless control, but cultivating an evolving relationship with unknowns. It requires redefining success in terms of flexibility, self-compassion, and openness to unexpected directions. Like a sailor who trusts the wind even when the destination is unseen, I discovered that surrendering to uncertainty can propel me toward horizons richer than rigid maps might offer. This shift in mindset is where a new story begins, one where lost no longer means stranded, but signals the start of exploration. Sometimes, during a late afternoon when the sun cast long shadows across my cluttered desk, I caught myself tangled in a fog of uncertainty, not because I lacked resources, but because I couldn't pinpoint the why behind my hesitation. It was as if I was trapped inside a labyrinth of choices with walls that shifted whenever I tried to focus. I thought back to a time when I took a spontaneous road trip without a destination, imagining that the thrill of wandering aimlessly might free me from the pressure of planning. Instead, what hit me was the gnawing anxiety of not knowing where I was headed, compounded by the creeping sensation that every wrong turn might set me back further. That trip mirrored so much about how I was handling my financial life, engaging with moments, reacting to crises, but rarely stepping back to chart a meaningful path. One evening, a close friend and I talked over dinner, and she described a metaphor that changed my perspective. She called financial uncertainty a fog across the landscape of dreams. The fog, she said, wasn't a barrier in itself, but a veil that distorts how far you can see, making landmarks seem unreachable or misaligned. I realized that my financial uncertainty didn't mean goals were unattainable. It just meant my vision was blurred. It struck me that to cut through this haze, I needed to craft not a map, but a lighthouse, something that would pierce through the mist to guide my steps, no matter how obscured the terrain became. Taking her words to heart, I began reflecting deeply on what kind of lighthouse I wanted. Rather than focusing only on budgets, I explored the emotions tied to spending, saving, and earning. One moment stands out vividly. Sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor, I lit a candle and asked myself, what does feeling financially safe really mean to me? The answer was surprisingly intimate. Freedom to breathe without dread, the ability to pause instead of panic during unexpected expenses, and permission to invest in joy without guilt nibbling at the edges. These revelations weren't discovered through spreadsheets. They emerged from engaging with my internal landscape, mapping the emotional topography of my fiscal story. In the weeks that followed, I started treating my finances less like cold calculations and more like an ongoing conversation with myself. I wrote letters to my future self, describing hopes and fears in vivid detail. For instance, one letter began, "Dear me in 6 months, I hope you stand tall knowing you honored your worth and took steps, no matter how small, toward security." Writing proved transformative, turning abstract hopes into tangible touchpoints. The act itself became a ritual that fostered renewed commitment and softened the grip of ambiguity. Not everything was smooth sailing, of course. There was a moment when an unexpected car repair upset my tentative plans, and the familiar rush of panic surged up, an all-too-human response to disruption. Instead of spiraling, I caught myself by pausing and recalling that internal conversation I nurtured. I whispered, "This is a detour, not a dead end." This internal pause, brief as a breath, shifted how I navigated disruption. I realized that resilience needn't be a heroic storm weathered with grit alone. Sometimes, it emerges from gentle self-reassurance and acceptance that setbacks are part of the terrain. Now, think about when you face unpredictability. How often do you grant yourself space to reorient emotionally instead of pushing forward mechanically? I discovered that building emotional checkpoints in my financial journey anchored me amid shifting circumstances. This helped alleviate the weight of rushing from crisis to crisis and allowed me to gather clearer insights about what truly mattered. A friend described this as laying stones on the path, a metaphor I cherish. Each stone represented conscious reflection, small wins, or recalibrations. Although the path wasn't always straight, it was marked by intentional steps that illuminated the way forward. Through this experience, I began noticing how financial fog isn't just caused by external obstacles, but also by fragmented internal narratives. Fragmented stories leave pieces of ourselves disconnected, hopes tangled with fears, desires dimmed by caution. Mending these narratives required compassionate listening to my own internal dialogue, uncovering assumptions and beliefs that had silently shaped my choices. It reminded me that financial clarity grows not from elimination of complexity, but from weaving coherence among the threads of my lived experience. Eventually, I found that clarity emerges less from having all the answers instantly and more from cultivating a steady pulse of self-awareness, akin to tuning a dial until the radio signal comes through clear. The process invites embracing curiosity without judgment and engaging with the discomfort of not knowing with openness instead of resistance. In those moments, I can begin to see what was obscured before: small opportunities, genuine priorities, and paths that align with my evolving sense of meaning. I want you to consider this when you encounter moments of doubt or confusion in your own financial journey. How might creating a lighthouse, a personal beacon that reflects your emotional truths and values, shift how you approach choices? Could such a signal help you navigate uncertainty with greater patience and clarity, turning trepidation into intentional action? From the turmoil of feeling directionless, constructing this inner compass may reveal that the power to move forward wasn't lost, but simply waiting to be found. I still remember the moment a close mentor looked me in the eye and said, "You're not lacking ability or grit. What you're missing is a firm grip on your direction, like trying to drive a car with the windshield fogged over." Those words struck a chord deep inside. It wasn't about failing or being broken. It was about steering blindfolded into intersections without signs. This image haunted me for days, imagining how much tension and strain live inside someone forced to make critical choices under a veil of uncertainty. I realized that without a clear vision of where I wanted to arrive, every fork in the road transformed into a paralyzing question mark. What if I chose wrong? What if I wasted energy going nowhere? One afternoon, while sorting through my monthly expenses, a sudden thought landed heavily. How many times had I made compromises simply to avoid confronting the unknown? I found myself nodding at each bill, each decision deferred or avoided. It dawned on me that indecision, disguised as playing it safe, robbed me of proactive growth. Like a climber hesitant to ascend a mountain for fear of slippage, I was surrendering to inertia driven by mistrust in my own judgment. This surrender wasn't laziness, but a symptom of a deeper unease, an invisible current pulling me away from purposeful action. Later that week, I sat down with a journal and a pen, asking something I hadn't dared articulate aloud. What keeps me from imagining a future where my efforts are guided by conviction, not fear? As the ink spilled truthfully onto paper, I discovered that uncertainty felt like a static charge disrupting the circuits of my motivation. Each unclear decision point created energy leaks, draining enthusiasm and casting long shadows over possibilities. This insight reframed my experience, not as failure, but as a delicate system struggling to maintain power amidst flickering signals. I realized I needed to repair the wiring of my vision before expecting steady progress. During this repair, an unexpected source of clarity arrived from an unlikely place, a neighbor's small community garden. Watching her carefully planting seeds in neat rows amidst uncertain weather reminded me that growth rarely bursts overnight. It requires anticipation, patience, and trust in cycles beyond immediate visibility. Her belief in the invisible potential below the soil taught me that envisioning where the garden would flourish was less about having all answers now and more about nurturing a space for emergence. This metaphor sparked a shift. I asked myself how I could nurture my financial intentions similarly, giving them space to unfold rather than demanding immediate outcomes. Carrying this renewed perspective, I began setting up simple rituals to anchor my focus. A weekly check-in where I reviewed not just numbers, but how specific goals aligned with my deeper values. In this process, I stopped measuring success solely by balance sheets or pay stubs and started asking, does this move me closer to living my envisioned life? Over time, these moments acted like beacons, offering a recalibration point to adjust priorities gently rather than forcing harsh corrections. Like a captain adjusting sails according to changing winds, I learned to navigate the currents with more grace and confidence. In one of these sessions, I caught myself wrestling with a choice. Should I commit to a side project that involved some financial risk, or maintain the safety of my current routine? The familiar voices of doubt clamored fiercely, cautioning retreat. But this time, I paused and leaned into a different question. What would embracing this opportunity teach me about my willingness to grow beyond comfort zones? This reframing shifted my nervousness into curiosity. I decided to test the waters carefully, setting a budget that honored my limits but didn't strangle possibility. Each step forward became an act of courage layered with calculated awareness, a dance between daring and discernment. As weeks passed, I noticed something profound rippling beyond my decisions, a softening of the grip that fear once held. I felt less like a hostage to uncertainty and more like a participant in the unfolding story of my life's financial chapter. This newfound stance didn't banish risk, but restored a sense of agency, an understanding that I could meet unknowns with thoughtful presence instead of frantic reaction. In embracing this evolution, I forged a quiet covenant with myself, to keep attuning to my intuition, to honor the subtleties of hesitation as signals rather than failures, and to seek meaning beyond immediate clarity. Consider times when you've stood at crossroads, senses heightened by confusion or doubt. How might this practice of gentle alignment transform your choices? Imagine replacing frustration with curiosity, tension with steadiness, even amid unclear circumstances. I believe that cultivating this equilibrium invites a richer experience of financial life, one that values resilience and adaptability alongside concrete plans. The true transformation lies not just in finding answers, but learning to measure progress by how attuned you are to your journey's rhythm. I recall that moments of ambiguity no longer elicit paralysis for me, but become invitations, calls to listen deeper, to adjust sails, to trust that the fog will lift enough to reveal enough ground. This doesn't mean neglecting responsibility. It means weaving accountability together with patience, weaving confidence with humility. Through this, my experience shifted from being lost in the dark toward being a navigator embracing the night's mysteries, equipped with a lantern fueled by intention and self-awareness. There was a particular afternoon that lingers vividly in my memory, a moment when I sat tangled in frustration, staring at an old, abandoned journal filled with scattered goals and half-begun plans. The pages felt like relics of a self I used to be, bursting with unresolved intentions, and plans postponed indefinitely. I could sense a quiet ache beneath the surface, a yearning to break free from the cycle of reactive choices. At that time, I began grappling with an unsettling truth. My challenge wasn't merely uncertainty, but an absence of intentional framing, a lens through which to view what I truly wanted, which would shape each decision with purposeful direction. Without that frame, each financial move became an isolated act devoid of meaningful context. Shifting my mindset towards crafting purpose became the spark that set things into motion. I recall feeling like an artist confronted with a blank canvas after years of sketching in the margins. There was a precariousness to this blankness, both daunting and exciting. For example, I started by imagining a typical day in my ideal financial future. What would my relationship with money look like? Which moments would bring peace rather than tension? As images formed, having choices free from scarcity, feeling secure in vulnerability, the abstract transformed into something palpably real. This vision not only energized me, but created an internal roadmap distinct from fleeting external pressures. Ironically, solidifying this vision demanded wrestling with discomfort that had previously been tucked away. There was a striking scene. Late one night, I sat under the dim glow of a lamp, and the question hit hard. What stories about money have I told myself that serve only to narrow my possibilities? The weight of ingrained narratives, tales about scarcity, unworthiness, or obligation, surfaced intensely. Unpacking these stories unleashed a flood of emotions. Resentment for missed opportunities, shame tied to past slip-ups, and fatigue from self-criticism. Yet diving into this inner turmoil was crucial. It revealed how deeply internal dialogues color our financial habits, often without conscious awareness. Confronting those shadows meant finally peeling back layers that obscured authentic desires. Alongside this emotional excavation, I began cultivating curiosity toward the unknown edges of my financial identity. For instance, I started asking questions that didn't require immediate answers, but encouraged exploration. What if my relationship with money could be rooted in creativity rather than fear? How might I embrace uncertainty as a signal of growth rather than threat? Such inquiries carved out psychological space to experiment with flexible thinking. I tried letting go of rigid rules I'd clung to and welcomed nuance, acknowledging that true progress could look messy, nonlinear, even contradictory. This flexibility gradually infused resilience where rigidity had once blocked me. At one point, I took a tangible step by designing a financial manifesto, a personal declaration that captured not just goals but values, emotions, and intentions around money. This wasn't about spreadsheets or budgets. It was an act of self-affirmation. Writing it felt like planting a flag on undiscovered terrain, staking claim to a renewed sense of agency. For example, I included statements affirming permission to prioritize well-being, celebrate small wins, and accept imperfection. Holding this manifesto close when facing challenging choices shifted the internal dialogue considerably, reminding me that clarity is an evolving process grounded in compassion. Events soon tested this emerging vision. Unexpected expenses surfaced like sudden storms, threatening to blow me back into old habits of panic and avoidance. In those tense moments, I paused and turned to that manifesto. Like consulting an ethical compass in tumultuous seas, I asked myself, which response reflects my authentic intentions? This reflection slowed reaction impulsivity and helped me approach problems with steadiness and intentionality. I noticed that although external circumstances remained unsettled, my inner world grew calmer, capable of holding complexity without succumbing to despair. Now, consider how the act of framing your financial narrative with purpose might alter your experience in moments of uncertainty. Creating a defined why behind your money decisions provides more than guidance. It offers emotional grounding. It empowers you to align actions with deeper meaning, dissolving the dissonance between what you do and what you truly want. Embracing this framing shifts the story from one of drift and reaction to active authorship, where each challenge becomes an opportunity to reaffirm values and shape your path with intention. Ultimately, this journey illuminated that financial direction is inseparable from meaning. Without vivid frames and heartfelt narratives, choices remain isolated and burdensome. But with them, Every decision resonates within a larger story, one that honors growth, acknowledges imperfections, and holds space for unfolding transformation. This realization opened a new horizon, revealing how the quest for clarity blossoms into a creative process of self-discovery and empowerment. One evening, I found myself sitting on my worn-out couch, the room dim except for the soft glow of a single lamp. What struck me most wasn't the numbers on my statements or the daunting future projections. It was a strange sense of detachment from the entire financial process. I realized I'd been treating money as an abstract enemy, almost something alien, instead of anything personal or reflective of my own values and desires. This alienation created a hollow space where meaningful engagement should have been. My financial life became a series of disconnected tasks. Pay this bill, save a little, cut a bit here, without emotional resonance or sense of ownership. This detachment reminded me vividly of a character from a novel I once read, someone wandering through a maze blindfolded, reaching out blindly, uncertain if the next handhold would be firm or crumble. Except, instead of a physical maze, the fog obscured my relationship with my financial self. The walls weren't visible obstacles. They were invisible patterns of avoidance, self-protective, yet ultimately isolating. I started to question how I could reclaim ownership and rekindle a sense of agency that had quietly eroded. One afternoon, walking through a bustling farmer's market, I watched a local vendor carefully arranging fresh produce with evident pride. She wasn't just moving fruits. She was curating a collection that told a story of community, nourishment, and care. That struck a chord, stirring a realization. If I approached my finances with the same care and intentionality, could I transform my relationship with money from something transactional into a form of self-expression? Inspired, I decided to experiment with imbuing meaning into mundane financial acts. For example, rather than automatically trimming expenses across the board, I began differentiating between cuts that protected my well-being and those that harmed it subtly. I recall marking a small joy fund in my budget, not as frivolous spending, but as an investment in mental health and motivation. Allocating money this way felt like planting vibrant flowers amidst functional but uninspiring rows of numbers. Over time, this practice enriched my sense of connection to my choices. At first, shifting my perspective wasn't easy. I faced an internal voice warning me against indulgence or optimism tied to finances. Yet, by embracing these emotional undertones openly, I opened a new channel for dialogue within myself. Once, feeling skeptical of my newfound joy fund, I journaled. Is this truly self-care, or am I avoiding responsibility? Writing these fears down didn't extinguish them, but eased their grip. I allowed myself to invite compassion into my view of mistakes and perceived imperfections, recognizing they didn't negate growth, but accompanied it. Another turning point unfolded during a casual conversation with a friend who described budgeting as a monthly conversation with oneself. The metaphor resonated deeply. I started treating my financial reviews less like audits and more like open-hearted talks with my inner world, checking in on hopes, fears, surprises. This approach carried me away from rigid structures toward a flexible rhythm, allowing space for adjustments rather than judgment. In one such conversation with myself, I admitted, I'm scared of unexpected expenses, but I'm learning to meet this fear without running from it. This candidness transformed anxiety into curiosity. Later, unexpected turbulence emerged. A medical bill I hadn't anticipated arrived abruptly, threatening to unravel my fragile equilibrium. Instead of spiraling into panic, I reflected on how far my internal dialogue had shifted. I imagined this event as a sudden gust testing a kite's string. Rather than snapping, I cultivated tension that held firm while allowing movement. I adapted my spending plans to absorb the shock and rebalanced priorities. Though the discomfort lingered, my capacity for resilience had deepened. The storm no longer felt like a sign of failure, but a natural part of navigating life's uncertainties. Now, visualize yourself encountering such crises in your own financial journey. How would fostering a personal dialogue, tender yet honest, with the emotions underneath change your responses? Cultivating this intimate, evolving conversation nurtures patience, gentleness, and resolve. It invites us to move beyond automatic reactions into active stewardship of our financial narrative, shaped as much by feelings as by numbers. Through these experiences, I gleaned a fundamental insight. Money is not merely currency exchanged, but energy that carries our inner story forward. By engaging it mindfully and empathetically, we weave together practical choices and emotional truths. This approach fills the void left by detachment, infusing financial life with meaning and vitality. More importantly, it builds a bridge from feeling lost among disjointed tasks to becoming a conscious architect of our own journey, equipped with openness, courage, and heart. There was a season in my life when mornings arrived wrapped in a fog of indecision, not because I lacked resources, but because uncertainty had tangled itself into every plan I tried to weave. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of juggling shifting priorities, I sat by my window and watched a line of fireflies flicker in the dark. Each blink seemed random, yet together they created a delicate pattern of light across the yard. It struck me then that confidence emerges in small, persistent moments of illumination, not in giant, flawless beams. I realized that cultivating steadiness required nurturing tiny sparks in the midst of the unseen. I started paying attention to how hesitation invaded my thoughts like a persistent murmur, making even simple decisions require disproportionate energy. This weight did not stem from complexity alone. Instead, it was the absence of landmarks to anchor my intentions. Instead of waiting for all uncertainties to clear, I experimented with embracing incremental clarity. For example, I broke down overwhelming goals into micro steps grounded in tangible actions that felt achievable day to day. There was a humble satisfaction in crossing off those tasks, like methodically piecing together a mosaic, each tile adding more definition to the emerging picture. One afternoon, during a walk through a crowded city park, I observed a group of birds darting and weaving in seemingly chaotic patterns. Yet, on closer look, they moved with precise coordination, each flight interdependent, responsive to shifts in wind and position. This image resonated with how my own journey toward financial stability needed to be navigated, not as an isolated march toward certainty, but as a dynamic dance with change. Flexibility and responsiveness became allies rather than foes. I stopped pressing for immovable answers and instead attuned myself to the rhythm of my needs and resources, adjusting course with fresh awareness. At one point, I challenged myself to reframe my sense of urgency. The pressure to fix everything now was suffocating. Instead, I practiced inviting patience into the process, grounding myself in the understanding that growth unfolds unevenly. I remember lighting a candle during a quiet evening and repeating a simple affirmation. Progress emerges in breaths, not sprints. In those moments, I acknowledged friction or setbacks as natural rather than failures, allowing myself compassion and renewal. This gentle patience opened space for steadiness to seed itself, easing the grip of frantic striving. I also began exploring how sensory experiences could anchor me amid swirling uncertainty. For instance, I developed a ritual of holding a smooth stone in my hand during moments when decisions felt overwhelming, a tangible reminder of solidity when my mind raced. This practice unexpectedly tethered me to calmness, grounding my scattered thoughts. Small physical anchors like this became symbolic checkpoints that translated abstract clarity into a felt experience, bridging mind and body in alignment. During a candid conversation with an old friend, I confessed my struggle with confidence, expecting judgment or platitudes. Instead, they shared their own story of navigating ambiguity, describing how embracing vulnerability opened doors to connection and insight. This unexpected exchange lifted a weight I hadn't realized I carried, the sense that confidence demands perfection. Their openness modeled that steadiness involves embracing doubt as part of growth, transforming it from a stumbling block into a stepping stone. In navigating this process, I uncovered how often my mind had mistaken silence or inaction for failure. Yet, these pauses sometimes served as crucial recalibration points. I recalled sitting quietly in my favorite armchair, inhaling deeply, and recognizing that it was okay to venture forward without all answers in hand. Such acceptance softened tension and carved pathways for renewed movement. Now, Imagine encountering your own moments where clarity seems elusive and decisions feel burdened with unseen weight. What if cultivating steady moments of self-trust and allowing incremental progress could replace the exhausting demand for certainty? What if small rituals, whether physical, mental, or emotional, could serve as anchors, helping you navigate shifting landscapes with resilience? These discoveries invite a richer awareness. Confidence is less a destination and more a mosaic woven from ongoing acts of presence, patience, and courage even amid uncertainty. Reflecting on this journey so far, I notice how the pieces we've explored intertwine like threads spun into an intricate tapestry, each strand distinct yet vital to the pattern emerging beneath my gaze. It's as if I've been navigating a dense forest, at times disoriented by shadows cast from unseen branches, only to gradually recognize subtle cues that hint at a path forward. The fog that once stifled my steps is not gone, but I've learned to listen beneath its hush, sensing the pulse of hints and rhythms that guide me when explicit landmarks disappear. In this process, I find myself walking a line between uncertainty and trust, a delicate balance where surrender does not signify giving up, but invites fresh perspective. The restless churn of doubt softens, yielding space to a quieter kind of knowing that blooms in moments when mind and heart align. I realize that clarity is not a fixed beacon ignited by sudden illumination, but a flickering flame nurtured patiently, inviting me to come closer, to steady my breath, and slow my pace. This tender glow whispers that while the landscape ahead may still be veiled, my footing becomes surer with deliberate attention and gentle resolve. I recall a night when, enveloped in silence, I traced the contours of these emerging insights. The distinctions between paralysis and pause, between fear and reverence for the unknown, revealed themselves with subtlety. The boundaries shifted as if drawn in sand, always adaptable, inviting me to relinquish rigid demands for immediate resolution. In acknowledging this fluidity, I sensed a quiet empowerment growing, a trust that the unfolding path need not be mapped in all its detail at once, but can emerge step by step, borne by steady intention. The complexity of tangled thoughts and emotions, once daunting, began to take on a new quality, resembling a vast ocean where waves incessantly rise and fall. Instead of bracing against the tide, I discovered an invitation to float with the current, to embrace the ebb and flow as integral to progression itself. Moments of clarity would surface briefly, like glimpses of stars through shifting clouds, anchoring me in the rhythm of gaining and losing sight, stepping and pausing. This cyclical dance felt less like faltering and more like learning a nuanced choreography, one where grace lies in attuning to the natural cadence rather than forcing acceleration. At times, I caught myself holding my breath, straining to capture certainty as though it were a tangible prize. But each time, that grip faltered, and I learned to release tension by welcoming imperfection and doubt as companions on this journey. I envisioned myself as a gardener tending to a fragile seedling beneath ever-changing skies, sometimes basking in sunlight, sometimes swaying with the wind, always committed to nurturing growth without demanding immediate bloom. This lived metaphor quieted inner critique, fostering tenderness that seeded resilience within. As I continue, the interplay between awareness and acceptance deepens. I'm beginning to perceive how the textures of my experience, anxiety, hope, confusion, blend not as obstacles, but as hues painting the full canvas of humans striving toward freedom and self-trust. This recognition feels like stepping into a room with a vast window, sunlight filtering through curtains once drawn tightly closed. The view remains partially obscured, but the invitation to move forward stands radiant and present. For you, as we pause here together, I encourage embracing this mosaic of realizations without rushing to tidy conclusions. The accumulation of insights crafts a terrain rich with possibility, inviting curiosity and patience to guide forthcoming steps. Imagine a ship setting sail not toward an invisible horizon, but navigating by shifting stars, responsive, attentive, courageous. It is in this space between not knowing and seeking, between fear and hope, that transformation quietly unfurls. I sense that the journey we share is less about arriving swiftly and more about cultivating steadfast presence amid unfolding mystery. In holding this space, I feel a renewed readiness to greet what comes next with openness and resolve, trusting that each moment holds its own meaning if met with the grace of intention. In the quiet moments when I reflect on my journey through uncertainty, I realize that the true challenge was never solely about mastering numbers or crafting perfect plans. It was about embracing a state of not knowing, learning to navigate the shifting terrain of doubt and possibility without losing my sense of self. I recall a night when the edges of all my fears gathered around me, whispering that I was simply outmatched by life's unpredictability. Yet, in that very darkness, a small, steady voice within urged me to keep moving, not by sprinting toward a guaranteed destination, but by trusting the unfolding process itself. I think now about how this persistent murmur of uncertainty became less an adversary and more a rhythm guiding my steps. The contours of my path revealed themselves not through grand revelations, but in countless quiet acts of courage. Those times I chose to face discomfort head-on, to pause and listen instead of rushing blindly. It's as if learning to live amid ambiguity transformed the fog into fertile soil, where seeds of insight could take root and grow toward sunlight. When I stopped seeking fixed answers and instead leaned into the dance of exploration, I began to uncover depth and resilience I had not known were mine. There was a moment, etched in memory, when I sat by a rain-veiled window, watching droplets trace slow trails down the glass. Outside, the world blurred and shifted, uncertain, unpredictable, and yet inside me stirred a budding openness, a growing willingness to accept the unknown as part of the fabric of my story. Questions that once felt like heavy weights became invitations to look deeper, to connect with my values and aspirations beneath surface anxieties. I remembered a phrase a mentor once shared: "Trust the fog. It carries you toward vision you cannot yet see." In this phrase, I found a fragile hope, a permission to surrender control without surrendering intention. This hope didn't erase fear or confusion overnight, nor did it promise a straight road ahead. It simply offered a new way to be with those emotions, to engage them as partners in creation instead of foes to be vanquished. I began experimenting with patience, cultivating an inner steadiness that allowed me to move forward even when my path appeared fractured or incomplete. Decision by decision, I rewired my mindset. Uncertainty became a lens for curiosity instead of despair. Unexpected detours stopped feeling like failures and started revealing hidden lessons and strengths. Throughout the nights thick with longing for clarity, I discovered that the true essence of confidence lies less in certainty and more in embracing vulnerability with grace. Taking tentative steps despite trembling knees felt transformative, not because it eliminated risk or doubt, but because it rewrote the story I carried about what it means to lead my life. I realized strength could coexist with softness, that resilience could bloom from the fertile ground of acceptance. In weaving these threads together, I created a tapestry not of perfection, but of authentic engagement with the messiness of growth. Now, I carry this wisdom as a quiet companion through days both bright and shadowed. When the familiar cloud of indecision descends, I remind myself that getting lost is an inevitable part of finding direction, that it is within wandering that paths emerge. This realization reshapes struggle into surrender, prompting me to lower my guard just enough to hear the subtle signals guiding me onward. I imagine others walking this same foggy landscape, carrying similar quiet storms and small lights. There is solace in knowing we are not isolated islands, but fellow travelers on a shared quest for meaning and agency. If I could whisper one invitation to anyone standing where I once stood, it would be this: cultivate kindness for yourself in moments of confusion. Celebrate the courage it takes to acknowledge uncertainty and move through it anyway. Recognize that forward momentum does not demand perfect clarity, but a willingness to engage each moment honestly, even when the horizon remains blurred. Our journeys are not defined by flawless execution, but by persistent commitment to growth amid imperfection. In sharing this with you now, I feel a profound gratitude for the unfolding story we write each day, rarely tidy, often challenging, yet always alive with potential. The hero within each of us is not broken or defeated. We are seekers learning to trust the unseen path beneath our feet. And in this learning, perhaps, lies the truest form of freedom.